conspiracy. Free and fair elections are the basis of democracy, the very basis. With no free elections, we are not free. We know very well that Barack Obama and the Democrats interfered in the 2012 elections by suppressing the conservatives from organizing. No grassroots movement for the conservatives, while the left organized. Now we're finding out more and more every day how bad it was that Obama's Justice Department and FBI interfered in the 2016 election. Trump probably would have won by a much higher margin had they not been interfering. So first, I think I want to do is talk about the never Trumpers. The never Trumpers. Now, do you get it? Do you get it? The never Trumpers said we can't support Trump because he's not a perfect conservative. He's going to ruin the conservative movement. This was their line. Some of them are still there today. And you have even the Bush family voted for Hillary. Remember John Kasich? The convention was in his home state. He wouldn't go there. He said he wouldn't vote for Trump. Ted Cruz didn't get it at first, didn't get it. He didn't endorse Trump, but then he came around. I wrote an article also on Front Page Magazine called Cruz's Courageous Right Move, where he did the right thing. He realized and he knew all along how much was at stake. So it's clear now, you can see these never Trumpers and anybody else, that if Hillary Clinton had won, there would be no more democracy, no more free elections, and the United States, as we know, will be finished. Hillary would serve 2 terms, and she would further embed and bias the DOJ and FBI, IRS, every other government agency. So in 8 years, you'd have another radical leftist, or maybe Chelsea for all we know. American business would be taxed out of business. Illegals would pour into the country, and the economy would crash. Anybody who had any savings, your savings would disappear into a bankrupt socialist state. So I think hopefully now Americans are understanding that these people are ruthless radicals. The Democrat Party has become a radical socialist party. Now, I wrote in my article today on InfoWars about the $12 million dossier, how it went down. And I looked at it from the monetary point of view, that the DNC is $6 million in debt. Now, they paid $12 million through laundering it through their law firm, Perkins Coie. By the way, that's the same law firm that handled Obama's birth certificate. And they laundered the money to Chris Steele and Russian intelligence retired spies, according to what I believe, to write this dossier, leaving themselves $6 million in debt. I wrote in my article, they probably didn't even care that they were $6 million in debt. They would recover that money from Russians or foreign donations later on, because I wrote an article with Jack Cashill in the American Thinker the week before that it was very clear from the language. We studied the language, the punctuation problems, the usage of English words that didn't make any sense, that this was not written by somebody whose first language was English. It was written by a Russian. So this is what the Russians essentially shook down the DNC for $12 million. On the one hand, it's kind of comical. On the other hand, it's very serious. Now, the best quote in that article was from former KGB spy Konstantin Preobrazhensky. He's a defector who lives in the United States, and he looked at the dossier, and here's what he told me. Very insightful. He said, there is no information in the dossier whatsoever. It's just foolish speculation. There are no references. It is not an intelligence document of any kind. I was laughing when I was reading it. Now, here's someone who was in KGB for years. So if he can look at it and realize how ridiculous it is, and I can look at it and see it was not written by anyone who speaks English for a first language, obviously the FBI could look at it, or the DOJ, and see that it was a total joke. But how did we get here? That's what I want to talk about. How deep does this go? I want to bring up some things you may not know about. Peter Strzok, of course, the guy who writes the texts and headed up the Hillary email investigation and started the Trump-Russia investigation. I want to tell you something, that the father of his sister-in-law, this is someone he knows, was pardoned by Obama right before he left office for leaking. Now, what did he leak? This is Peter Strzok's, the father of Peter Strzok's sister-in-law, was named General James Cartwright, former vice chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he got charged and convicted of lying about speaking to the New York Times about the U.S. and Israeli efforts to cripple the Iranian nuclear program, the Stuxnet virus. So I thought, well, how could it be that Peter Strzok knows this guy who tried to destroy the program, to destroy Iranian nuclear program? Could he have leaked it through a relative? Well, we know that James Comey doesn't like to leak directly to the press. So could it be that Peter Strzok was leaking on behalf of Obama several years ago? You have to ask, why would Obama pardon a guy who had leaked, who knew Peter Strzok? So how deep does this go? Now, don't forget, we said Obama weaponized the IRS in 2012. Of course, my bank account, if you remember, was given to a leftist reporter out of San Francisco because I made the movie Dreams from My Real Father, where I said Obama was a complete fraud, and somehow they got a hold of private information. You have to wonder, did the FBI have something on John Roberts, Chief Justice, to get him to vote for Obamacare? These are now legitimate questions. This is not any speculation anymore. Now, have you ever seen Carter Page on TV? Ever see him try to answer questions? I saw him on Laura Ingraham. This guy can't answer a question straight. His body language is very weird. We researched him and found out he was a Democrat. And if you just look at him, there's just something wrong there. And when he starts to talk, there's something wrong. So we have to ask the question, was he a plant working for the FBI? Just like we know that the Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselinskaya, was meeting with Fusion GPS and got a visa to enter the United States from Loretta Lynch. That was a setup. So how deep does this go? If we can't have free elections, we're not free. Now, why did the Democrat Party become so radicalized? How did it become this way? Well, after the break, I'm going to get into that in detail, but just remember this, that starting in the 50s, the Russians understood they could not defeat the United States militarily because of our nuclear capability. They also understood there would be no workers' revolution. So they sought out to use politics. They saw the weakness of the United States was its political system and its open society, like George Soros has the open society foundation. The open society was the way to destroy the United States. They could slowly, over time, take over the Democrat Party and turn it into a radical party. It eventually worked. And that's where we are today, such that the entire apparatus of the government is now supporting radical leftists to maintain power. The goal of this is to eventually allow Russia to exercise its power and use its will around the world and not be constrained by the power of the United States. After the break, we're going to look very closely at the people in power and the connections and the networks before we talk to David Horowitz at the end of the half hour. Be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I am your host, GIlbert, coming to you right from the left coast. We're talking about how we got to this situation. What is going on? How deep is this that we have so many government agencies working against the American people? Let's take a look at today's leading Democrats, the ones that people vote for and voted for recently. Of course, we have Barack Obama, who I have identified as a red diaper baby, the child of a Soviet agent. This is the man that raised him, Frank Marshall Davis, whispering in his ear things like, America really sucks. There's a perfect world. Russia, Stalin, the Soviet Union. That's the ticket, Barry. Everyone's really happy. Hey, Barry, have a little more marijuana. Stalin is great. There's no gulags. There's no starvation. You could be that guy one day. This is Obama being raised by a radical. Then we have Hillary Clinton, an ally of Saul Alinsky, the Chicago radical, who taught the rules for radicals. She wrote her thesis on Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky liked her so much he wanted to hire her. And she wrote him a letter. We have a copy of the letter. She said, Saul, I love you, but I don't want to come to Chicago to work for you. I want to work within the system. I want to try to take over the system from within. Then we have Obama's advisor, who today, of course, we see him on CNN every day, David Axelrod. Both of his parents, members of Communist Party USA. Another big advisor who influenced so many people and influenced appointments in the government was, of course, Valerie Jarrett. Her father, mother, father-in-law were communists. Vernon Jarrett worked with Obama's father, Frank Marshall Davis, on the Chicago Star, the communist newspaper. Then there's Eric Holder, was Attorney General. He said he was Obama's wingman. We know that he was in the Black Panthers at Columbia University. He was part of an armed takeover of an empty building there. Eric Holder, Attorney General. Of course, there's Bernie Sanders, straight up communist, socialist, believes in a political revolution. Another big player in the Democrat Party, Keith Ellison, #2 Democrat, worked with the Nation of Islam for years. Jonathan Jay was Director of Homeland Security, his grandfather, Communist Party. Of course, CIA Director John Brennan admitted that he voted communist in 1976. He admitted he voted for the Communist Party. So what were Brennan and Holder doing for all those years? They turned the CIA and FBI and DOJ far to the left. In the DOJ, for example, Department of Justice, they only hired lawyers from 5 organizations: the ACLU, La Raza, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the NAACP, and the Mexican American Defense League. If you wanted to work for Department of Justice, you had to come from one of those organizations. The Department of Justice became a radical social justice organization instead of an organization to enforce the law. Comey and Podesta, same thing. They filled all the positions with radical leftists. It's the same thing like the universities. All the universities are filled with jobs with liberals and leftists, and they took this model and took it into the federal government. That's how we got here. So it almost didn't matter to them if Trump won, because they're so deeply embedded in the government that they can carry on their own agenda. And next up on their agenda, of course, every day they're pushing for illegals, open borders, don't build a wall, legalize illegals. I'm going to take a look at a video that's based on the weight of the poor, the Fox-Piven theory that if you overburden the system with people and obligations and money, you can collapse the government and then rebuild it as a socialist society. Let's look at my video of the illegals and the weight of the poor. You see, the communists are helping people over the border, and they want to give them health care. They want to sign them up for free housing, disability, on and on, because the American voters will no longer support a party that doesn't make them the priority. And that's their theory, is to collapse the system. This is a video from my film, There's No Place Like Utopia. So that's the play right now. The middle America average voter, even their traditional base of African Americans, Hispanics, they're starting to get it, that the Democrat Party hasn't done anything for them. In my film, There's No Place Like Utopia, I went to Southside Chicago, talked to a lot of black people. They just said, we got poorer under Obama, things got worse. We don't want illegals coming into our community and driving down wages. We don't want marijuana and drugs legalized. We want more police, on and on. So the radical agenda that was propped up by white communists in Chicago who recruited Obama. Obama had no support amongst black people in Chicago. It was only the white liberals and the former radicals out of the Weather Underground. They knew Obama, they didn't support him. It was only when he came on a national stage that he promoted his phony